All right, so we'll talk about a couple things. So a Rosarena on the bottom, and I just like there's a few things that I see that I think can be better adjusted. And I know that there were some comments about slow to go, start earlier, go slower, and I believe that you have to go slow. I mean, you have to go slow and you have to go smooth. But I think the biggest thing that you want to make sure is you can do that as late as possible, right? So it's not about really trying to start as early as possible. It's actually go slow as late as possible. So if you can maintain going slow, smooth, under control, and not feel rushed, then go as late as that'll allow you to do. So yeah, I think that is the biggest thing that helps hitters is being able to go as late as possible. Because realistically, you want to be able to, your foot's going to be in the air when the ball is in flight. You want to be under control, and you can't go so early that you get into some problems. So let's look at his back knee. This is the kind of one thing. So his back knee, and I'm just going to kind of put an arrow here, but I want you to really pay attention to right there. He actually loses it backwards, so he loses some bounce. If you look at his foot, he rolls to the outside of his foot, and now he's actually on the outside of his foot. So instead of rolling back to the inside of the foot and getting more linear movement with momentum, he's actually on the outside of his foot falling right now. And so he's ended up falling downhill or down into the ground and landing kind of firm. So he's just landing hard into the ground. And notice how at this landing position, he's collapsing the knee versus actually getting his leg into a lengthened position at landing. So he's actually in this collapsed, right? So it's kind of collapsed as he lands, and his belly button's already facing forward. So you have to think about if you're going to get, all this pressure from the ground, you would have to hit an outside pitch and face it. So I'm going to show you, how big leaguers land. They land with their heel on the ground and their belly button facing home plate and they're getting also lateral movement. So you can see how his heel, he's rolling into his big toe, right? So that knee is rolling laterally. The whole leg is one system, right? So this whole leg is just falling. And that is the biggest trick, because eventually it's going to get too far for the ankle and the mobility, and so it's going to have to roll into the big toe, and then the calf is going to have to flex and ignite and actually start the turn, and then the hip's going to do its thing, and you're gonna kind of get that full effect. But notice how your son is landing. He's actually landing collapsed and open. So if this was a slider or an outside pitch, he can't even make an adjustment, right? Because he's already too far forward. So you have to land closed, because the furthest and the deepest pitch you'll get is away from you. So you have to be prepared for anything that moves away. So if you're fooled visually and you're landing open, that's just a recipe for disaster. So, one more thing we'll talk about is, the landing with his shoulders, right? So as he lands, he's kind of pulling, or he's landing with his shoulders, kind of uphill. So if you're landing uphill, you're just gonna offer at pitches up in the zone. That's just, you're already giving yourself that look uphill to try to offer at balls up in the zone. So if you learn to land, like he's landing, or he's in the ground, but he's still downhill. He's still downhill. That's what we want to make sure is happening, because now you're looking downhill. Notice how his chin is resting on his shoulder. So, he's very stable in his landing. His eyes are kind of or his chin's on the shoulder. He's using that for stability. And so, and it's a downward movement. So anything that's up in the zone, his chin is going to be shoved with that front shoulder, and your eyes are going to go, they're going to go bye-bye. They're not going to be able to see. So this just keeps you a little bit more disciplined and looking downhill and really starting that first move, and notice how he's going down, and then it's going to invert, and then the shoulders kind of make their way. But that first initial move has to be in a downward movement. So, that's just something to think about. I think there's a couple things that he could probably work on. You see the collapsing of the back knee, and then really he's just spinning on the back leg. Watch the front leg. It's not even a motor to try to crank on it. So he's basically spinning his back hip, and his front hip is really not doing anything. Whereas if you watch a Rosarena, it's firm, and he's firming everything out to go. And that's the front hip being the contributing factor on trying to rotate around. So you're trying to make sure you get around the front hip axis, not the back. The back is just going to be a stability. So your head and your back shoulder and your knee and your hip, they're all going to be in alignment, because that's where the stability is going to come from. But that's just something you can focus on. But I would say the landing has to get cleaned up. That first movement pattern to getting the knee over the foot is where a lot of kids have that first problem. And so I would always suggest keeping the knee inside the foot. That way you're always constantly knowing you're moving forward as soon as your front foot gets picked up. That allows you to go as late as possible, still as smooth as possible, and you just don't have all these giant movements. Because as the velocity gets better and the change of speed gets better, you're going to want to do as very, very little movements as possible, very efficient, very small movements, and still get the same out of it. So hopefully this helps.